Hi there, and welcome to episode 2 of Nocturnal Transmission. We are going to be talking with Darren Brown, who is a physiotherapist in London, UK, and Renée Pang, who is a doctor in Stratford, Ontario. And both of them are working in this new COVID environment in the healthcare field, in the medical field, as professionals. And both of them have had some interesting experiences and takes on COVID. Darren, unfortunately, had contracted COVID and is experiencing long COVID symptoms. And Renée is trying to carry on business as usual with a practice that is exploding in need. So, looking forward to sharing this episode with you and hearing a little bit of COVID in the medical system. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Ryan.
Thank you so much. Yes, exactly. This is attempt number 500 of this recording, and I would like to say that the first 4 were fine. The first 4 were completely my fault, actually. But then the last one was great. But then maybe I was recording when you weren't ready, and so here we are recording when we're both ready.
I know there was a slight element of stealth recording, Ryan, so I feel much more able to provide full informed consent over this recording now.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm in case it isn't obvious, this is a very new format for me, doing this recorded thing, this podcast situation. So, I'm learning as I go, and I've learned a valuable lesson here today, which is don't secretly record people, trick them into saying horrible things, and then use it against them if you want to remain friends. So now we know.
Oh, but Ryan, we've been friends for a very long time now, so I think
we have.
These indiscretions are easily passed.
Okay, well, lovely Darren Brown. Where are you? Tell me where you are in the world.
Hello. Yes, I'm Darren Brown, and I live in London in the UK.
Lovely, and in a beautiful apartment, I might add.
Thank you very much.
Well, I haven't seen it in a bit, but you did show me photos recently of some of your renovations, and they were gorgeous. The plant room
is a very slow process. So, like towards the very beginning of a pre-COVID world, the beginning of this year, I decided to turn my spare bedroom into a study, which is what I'm currently sat in now. And as you can see, it's relatively bare because over the course of this year, things haven't quite gone to plan.
Well, I wish I could relate, but my 2020 has been a real zinger. So, so you work as a rehab specialist.
Yes, indeed. I am a physiotherapist. Note to self, Ryan. He called me an occupational therapist more than once. And occupational therapists are wonderful. However, I am not one.
No, you're a physiotherapist. Fine. So, and you've been, but then we landed on rehab therapist because it's a lovely blanket term. And so you've been working in the big, forgive me, I don't know the name of the hospital where you work, but it's the big hospital. It's like the downtown London hospital, right?
Oh no, it's actually not. So
Really?
There are lots of London hospitals, and the one that I work in is by no means the largest. There are much bigger hospitals than where I work. But where I do work is a specialist centre for certain health conditions. And one of those is HIV. So as a physiotherapist, I specialise in HIV in the context of disability and rehabilitation for people living with HIV. And where I work, it actually happens to be Europe's largest HIV centre.
Well, I knew it was something large. And
you're such a size queen.
I can't help myself. It's just the certain words I just cling to. And so when I was doing my Instagram live show, you were online at 3 a.m. your time because you were getting ready for the overnight hours because you were working in the emergency room. So, but that's not normal for your hospital, is it, to have?
No. So. We spoke a long time ago, and I actually can't remember when that was. That might have been around April. Yeah, that seems like a lifetime ago. But
Yes,
yeah,
doesn't it?
ordinarily, my role as a physio is I work both for people that are in the hospital, so an inpatient setting, and also providing outpatient care, predominantly for people living with HIV and or cancer. But obviously, when COVID hit during the first wave, as it's been termed, which was earlier this year through March and April, London was hit particularly bad, and so pretty much every hospital in London was hit. To capacity, and at that time everybody was working their hardest to try and cope and manage, and that included being redeployed. So I was redeployed from my usual setting into a different setting. So that included acute medical wards to help people get out of hospital as safely and quickly as possible to create capacity. Then also working in high dependency units for people that needed non-invasive ventilation. So that's like masks to help people breathe that were suffering with COVID acutely. And then also intensive care. So this is for people that need higher levels of care, including intubation and ventilation, which is where a machine does all of the breathing for you. And you may be sedated into what's called a medically induced coma. So when I spoke to you back then, we had our shifts changed even further. So we weren't only redeployed, we were also working overnight shifts. And that was about supporting people in the intensive care units to be in the right positions to help their breathing. So that could include something called proning, which is where you turn somebody onto their stomach. And that requires a team of at least 7 people.
Wow.
So there were groups of us that were going around and proning and deproning people that were in the intensive care unit, and also providing physiotherapy for people in terms of their lungs. So doing what's called chest physiotherapy.
Wow.
And then also thinking about the rehabilitation of people that become critically weak when they're in intensive care very rapidly. But times have changed, not doing that anymore, back into my usual role.
Yes.
In some capacity.
And is that because, is it likely that situation, that hospitals will be overloaded again, or are the treatments have changed as well? Have they not?
Yeah, so lots changed actually since the beginning, hasn't it? So, first of all, there are tests. Treatments have changed in terms of what we can do now. So there are some medicines, so steroids, been shown to be effective in reducing people dying, and certainly, that we're in a different capacity now in terms of social distancing. Creating space between people, and also many places around the world have got travel restrictions and have been in various different forms of lockdowns or enforced isolations to prevent transmission of the coronavirus, which causes COVID or coronavirus disease. So we are in a different place right now, but we're in the midst of a second wave here in the UK, and we've only just yesterday come out of our second lockdown.
Well, congratulations on that. Coming out of your second, on coming out of your lockdown. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's why I do look like a caveman, and I'm desperate for a haircut and a beard trim. Look at this. I really look like I'm absorbing my Celtic roots. Look at the gingerness in this. I mean,
I have to say I'm a bit of a ginger fan. I think. I think there are a lot of people that are ginger sympathizers, would vote ginger in an election.
They'd vote ginger. I mean,
so
is that an emerging political party?
I mean, it's the kind of politics I can certainly get behind. It's pretty easy to.
No ulterior motive, Ryan. None.
Until they start mandating like forced color changing, although I've always identified as a blonde. Anyway, we'll move on from that. I should put some sort of a filter and make my hair blonde just for the remainder of that. It really lightens up in the summertime, I promise.
Bit of lemon juice and you're good to go.
And some salt and some peroxide. So while you were helping people pronate?
Yeah, there was that proning. That was one part of it.
In the emergency room, do you think that's where you caught COVID when you got it yourself?
No, not at all. Shock. I contracted COVID-19. No, I actually contracted COVID during my usual role in March.
Okay.
Yeah, so I contracted COVID through occupational exposure. So at work, I was off work for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then returned to work. And it was actually on my return to work after having acute COVID-19 that's when all the redeployment started. So I had officially recovered from COVID-19 at that point. And the reason I do, wiggling bunny ears is because I still haven't recovered because I am now unfortunately living with the long-term consequences or sequelae of COVID-19.
Right.
So that's been called various different things. Some people are calling it long COVID, some people are calling it long haul or long haulers COVID, and then other people are calling it post-COVID, which is a term that I really do not like.
Yeah, because you feel pretty strongly that it's connected to COVID, so calling it post-COVID is a little misleading.
Yeah, because it basically is 100% related to the fact that I contracted COVID.
Correct. Yeah. So
I contracted coronavirus disease, and I had coronavirus disease,
yeah.
COVID.
Wow.
So yeah, 100% related. It's inextricably related.
And so you continued working after you recovered, wiggling bunny ears, doing some, sounds like horrifying, but also life-saving procedures and helping out in where things were hardest hit. And then when did you start to feel like your symptoms were coming back or they were not gone? When did you start being impacted again?
Yeah, do you know what? That's really interesting because, like if we think about kind of like acute COVID-19, I think most people are aware of kind of what those symptoms are, the cough, the breathlessness, the fluctuations in temperature and fevers, loss of smell and taste, and all of those things. There's a whole cluster of symptoms. But after I recovered, I still had some symptoms. I was still a bit breathless. I didn't have my usual exercise tolerance. I was a bit fatigued, and smell took months to recover. But that was just the after effects of being acutely unwell. And it was probably not until about 3 months after I was still experiencing fatigue. Fatigue that was the only way I could describe it was like it would come out of the blue for like a 24-hour period, and it was like someone turned the light off and you just felt like your batteries were drained and there was nothing left, and it would last for like 24 hours, and then the next day after like you'd fallen asleep and woken up again, you'd be like, oh, someone's reset the button, it's great, and you'd crack on. But then that would happen like every 1 or 2 weeks. But then following that, the fatigue started to creep more and more into day-to-day life. And as a physio, my usual way of managing that with a lot of my patients is physical activity and exercise. So I was doing exercise. I was trying to exercise my way out of fatigue, and thinking if I improve my cardiorespiratory function, my heart-lung function, and my general exercise tolerance, the fatigue will go away. Not realizing that I was doing the worst thing possible. I was actually exercising with a post-viral type fatigue, and that actually exacerbates the symptoms.
Right, it weakened you as opposed to made you stronger.
Yeah, exactly. So about 6 months after having COVID, I crashed, properly crashed, where I couldn't do anything, and then I was actually signed off work for 2 months.
Wow.
And I'm now about a month into a phased return to work after that. So it's actually taken 3 months to recover properly from the implications of exercise, with now I know is long COVID.
Wow. I mean, so I guess the same idea, like eating my way happy also wouldn't work.
Well, I mean, like, there's nothing bad about a little bit of moderate chocolate. I mean, like honestly, lockdowns have not been good on my waist, and now that I can't even exercise, I have got really fat, Ryan. Like, I am wearing black on purpose.
I was gonna say, you don't look fat. You look slim.
No. Slender shoulders, but not at the hips, Ryan. No, because Darren couldn't do much movement, and Darren was sitting on the sofa eating his emotions.
Well. I can relate to some of those things, especially the eating emotions and the sofa. I'm on my sofa right now. But I was going to say, that must have been terrifying, but also, there's some huge parallels between the stigma of HIV, I think, and the stigma of COVID, because there's a lot of shame around how people are getting COVID, especially now because we have these limitations and lockdowns, where there's an assumption that if you get it, it's your fault. And then there's kind of, I would say there's probably a lot of people that didn't want to have contact, with you, and they found out. But did people's attitudes towards you change when you were suffering from COVID, or have you found that people are like, oh, you've got the bad one, I don't want to talk to you?
No, you know what? I haven't experienced that at all, and I think part of the reason for that is because my social interactions have pretty much been restricted to work. So it's either people with illnesses or healthcare professionals. Right. So actually, I haven't necessarily experienced that. I think in my personal life, I am in a relationship, and there was some uncertainty about that. But unfortunately, I gave COVID to my boyfriend, and he became he had fear about, is there a risk of getting it again? And so that was something that we went through. So that was an experience. But I think in terms of what you mentioned about parallels, I think that one of the parallels that I've noticed most recently is about actually what people have been experiencing with the long-term consequences of COVID or long COVID, where a lot of people are experiencing lots of different symptoms. So at the moment, there's not really a definition of what long COVID is. That there hasn't been a consensus definition yet, because we're still living through the evolution of this. But there has been some work on kind of trying to talk about, well, what could it be? And they've kind of created these 4 syndromes that they believe people fit into under the umbrella of long COVID. So one is like post-intensive care syndrome. Another one is permanent organ damage.
Wow.
Another one is like post-viral fatigue syndrome. Another one is what they're calling post-COVID syndrome, which is where people are just having persistent symptoms that they've had for COVID all the way through. So like if I was to put myself into one of those categorizations, my symptoms probably fit within the post-viral fatigue. But the problem is that we're seeing that a lot of people may fit within those, but they can also bleed between, and there may be a mixing of those. So you may fit within more than one. So at the minute, I'm under investigation for potential organ damage because of symptoms that I still experience. So my heart is not functioning in the way that it normally would, which is that my heart rate goes up really high when I do not very much. So I'm under investigation for that. But then the fatigue is what I'm living with. So to come to the point of the similes or the parallels, I think that a lot of people that are experiencing long COVID, the most prevalent symptom seems to be fatigue, even though there is a cluster of so many different symptoms that people can experience. But what I've noticed is that there's an awful lot of either perceived or real skepticism about people's functional capacity, people's functional ability in their day-to-day lives. And with that, there's also a lot of shame and stigma. Right. So, for example, I know people that have been really, really, really worried and concerned to talk to their employers or their managers or their bosses about how much they're struggling at work. And this is healthcare professionals.
Yes.
Because they're worried that they won't be believed.
Right.
Or they're ashamed that they can't do what they want to be able to do. And so because of that, people are pushing through and suffering the consequences. And there's probably quite a silent majority of people that are struggling on their own, completely silently, and not telling people, because the volume of people that have contracted COVID is huge. But we don't know how many people are living with long COVID because there's not a definition. There's no counting of it in any national database. Right. And so we have no idea how many people are struggling with the symptoms, for example, like what I've been experiencing.
Right.
I've just been very lucky that I've been supported by healthcare professionals. And at one point, I couldn't carry on functioning. At my worst, I was bedbound. And so I had to take stock and learn to put myself first and prioritize my health.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you did that. That must have been
a learning curve, Ryan. It's not. It doesn't come naturally.
Well, you take care of others before you take care of yourself, usually, right? So this is...
I would say that normally I am very, 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 very focused on my employment role and the periphery things that come around that in terms of research, academia, and advocacy. But I've learned that I need to put myself first.
Yeah. Well, and for the health of you, for the health of your relationship, I mean, how important has your boyfriend been in your
Godsend.
recovery?
Godsend. I don't know how I would have coped. So during that time when I was signed off work, those 2 months, so like the first week I was bedbound, the second week I could only pretty much get to the sofa. And then for the following week, I was pretty much flat bound. I couldn't get out of the flat because I live in a second floor flat with no lift. I couldn't go up and down the stairs. Then I had to use a walking stick. And then it was between kind of like week 4 and 5 that the clouds started to lift, which I do attribute to a particular supplement that I've been taking.
Oh, yes, this coenzyme Q10.
Yeah, not for the beauty treatment, not for the. No.
I mean, it does. You do look supple and taut, I must say.
Oh, it's definitely the ring light, and
but you also, I mean, you also sounds like you've looked also to other alternative natural supplements, like anything that will help, right?
So just to finish off that point, my boyfriend and my family were godsends, and I would not have coped without them, because even before I was signed off sick, my boyfriend was having to batch cook me meals because I would get home from work and just crash on the sofa. I didn't have the energy to do anything except get to and from work and do a day of work. And so if he wasn't making me batches of food, I wouldn't have had anything to eat. And when I was really unwell, I couldn't get out of bed for periods, so I couldn't eat unless food was brought to me. So I wouldn't have coped, and my recovery would have been completely hampered if it wasn't for the support of my partner and my parents. And then I think also, to add to that, people that have reached out and been kind and been nice and been so compassionate. And I cannot say enough how nice that's been when someone actually reaches out to you and just says, I'm thinking of you, and sends you good wishes. Like, there's nothing people can do, especially when you're in a lockdown.
Yes.
But that just means the world, because when you're strapped to your flat or your bed or your sofa and you can't do anything and you feel like your body's a prison, knowing that someone is thinking of you just means the world, because you feel less isolated.
Yes, and for those of us who, I mean, as far as I know, I do not have COVID or long COVID, but I do have extreme isolation fatigue, and I'm not even fully isolated. I have a tight circle. We don't have, we call it lockdown here, but it's not the same as what has been happening in other parts of the world. So so there has been opportunity for me to see individuals in small batches and all of that stuff. But my goodness, it's really taking a toll on my mental health. It's making me less energized. I don't feel, I have a lot of what's the point thoughts, and so I've noticed a definite change in my motivation to do things. And so I can imagine like that on top of what you're going through is just like a wedding cake of despair that you didn't want.
Do you know what's really interesting with that, Ryan? Because I think that being a healthcare professional, some of that lockdown isolation hasn't necessarily been experienced as much as maybe the general public, because we're still going to work and seeing patients and seeing each other in a healthcare setting. So for most of the year, outside of when I was so unwell I couldn't go to work, I actually wasn't isolated. So I don't know that I've experienced the same thing that a lot of people have experienced. In fact, the majority of the people have been experiencing during this time. But certainly I got a sense of it by the end of month 2, being at home and not being able to go anywhere, plus being functionally limited.
Right.
I couldn't climb the walls, but figuratively,
Yes.
I felt like I was climbing the walls.
So I put it in a different way.
And which is also where, like, with one of the things that I think I mentioned, about the skepticism. Did I mention this? I don't think I did, actually.
No, tell me more about the skepticism of people believing
So
that you have.
you mentioned earlier about parallels, didn't we? God, we've gone off on tangent. So parallels, like one of the things with all of these clusters of symptoms is like fatigue is there. And I mentioned that people have been pushing through because fear of not being believed.
Yes.
But with that skepticism and the shame and the stigma of that,
Yes.
you know, I've now forgotten the point. What was the tangent on that?
People don't believe your symptoms, your fatigue and
Oh yeah. So one of the things for me is I'm actually really keen to get back to work because I don't want to be in a pseudo lockdown environment where I can't see people. And actually for my mental health, there's benefits to going back to work.
Yes.
So the idea that people would say to me that I'm you know,
faking it.
I'm pulling a sickie. You know, it's just completely not making any sense because I don't want to be at home on my own.
Yes.
It's not in my best interest.
Yes. Yes.
I want to be at my normal functional ability. I want to do the things that I'm passionate about.
Yes.
And I want to be surrounded by people and feeling like I'm actually being productive in my outputs in the response to this global pandemic.
Yes. And you're working 3 days a week now instead of 5.
So yeah, I'm on a phased return to work.
Okay.
So what that basically means is it's a slow increase in the days and the hours and the type of work that I do. So you know, it's incrementally increasing, and so far it's working well. I'm nearly at half my usual hours now. So I'm getting there, but still not normal. You know, like you know, for example, I worked on Wednesday, and you know, you're still getting home from work and crashing on the sofa for a few hours and falling asleep. And you know that for a 37-year-old man, that's not normal to do less than a full day's work, and for that to cause that amount of tiredness to have to sleep on the sofa for a few hours before even thinking about can I eat tonight.
Wow. And
so I'm still not normal.
And right now you're having your heart checked out.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of what next steps in your recovery are going to look like?
So next steps. So obviously the phased return to work will carry on, and I'll eventually get back to full-time work. And the plan is either before or after Christmas and the New Year. I think it's just, fortunately, my employers are being flexible to a degree to say that they will respond to what my body is going to allow me to do. Because the problem with this is forcing beyond what's called your energy envelope. So how much energy you've got in a day is not going to help you. Right. And unfortunately, energy is consumed by not just physical activities or physical exertions, but by cognitive and emotional exertions. Yes. So, for example, you know, the reason that we've attempted this more than once is because, you know, there have been times when I've not had the energy to do these sort of things, but I'm on a rest day today. So I've had the chance to pace myself and plan when I was going to do this. And it's in the evening. So I knew that if my day wasn't going well, I could do what I needed to do and delay again if need be. But, you know, I'm on the right trajectory. But in terms of where things go, it's to continue with further investigations to see if there is any impairment of any of my body organs or body parts. And then it will be hopefully getting in. So in England, there's been a large amount of funding by our National Health Service to create long COVID clinics. Okay. So there are going to be 40 odd of them in across England. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I may potentially be referred into one soon, because obviously that's important, not only from a data collection perspective about how many people are living with this problem, but also in terms of review, monitoring, and then also research. And more importantly, actually, hopefully something that helps me.
Yes, I was going to say, I'm like, research, that's all good. Data collection, you're such a researcher. You're such a healthcare nerd.
I'm a nerd. I'm a proper nerd. But you know what? This tangent, I'm actually really pleased that I'm doing this, because one of the other problems that I've been having is cognitively. So like they call it brain fog, where your brain just doesn't function in the same way.
Well, you did forget about yesterday.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. But but like I have been having memory problems where like my short-term memory is like I can get lost on topics quite quickly, and it's worse when I'm really tired. Like if I'm really fatigued, I can really struggle, and I can't process. Like, for example, at the weekend, went to the supermarket with my boyfriend, and I think I was just having a day where it wasn't so good, and I just felt really tired on the way to the supermarket, but the supermarket became too much, and I couldn't process what was going on the shelves. I couldn't read things. There was too many words, too many colours, too many people, too much noise, and I had to get out of there. I couldn't take it in, and that was like the weekend. So, you know, it's still really episodic and up and down. But I mention that because I am proud that I can remember that we've come off a tangent, and that tangent was supplements.
Yes, supplements. Yes, they've been helping.
So I've been taking everything I can get my hands on that may potentially be useful. So I was advised by a friend who is wonderful and lives with ME and has given me some guidance. He recommended two things. So one was coenzyme Q10.
What's ME, by the way?
It's what does it mean? I don't know. So it's an enzyme, and
oh no, your friend lives with ME. I thought you said.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant the coenzyme.
No.
So that stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis, or more commonly known as chronic fatigue syndrome.
Okay, we're on the same. Okay, great. So,
sorry, yeah.
And your friend recommended coenzyme 10.
Coenzyme Q10.
Coenzyme Q10, yes.
And then also CBD oil.
Oh,
so
yes.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll start with the coenzyme Q10, see how that does. And actually, after about 4 or 5 weeks...
Sorry, there's some sort of emergency outside. We'll just ignore it.
Okay.
So after 4 or 5 weeks...
A cloud lifted and it felt better. And I've been taking it ever since. Wow. And I am attributing that, because it is also in a load of beauty treatments, to a potential improvement in my skin. So I don't think I look as haggard as maybe I could do, considering goddamn tired I am. But the other things I've been taking is loads of other vitamins. But I have got onto the CBD oil.
Yeah.
So I'm now 3 weeks in of taking it daily. And I tried it once and I thought it was brilliant the first time I took it, about well over a month ago now, but before I returned to work. But the reason I liked it was because it took away all my symptoms that day. But the following day, I accidentally took 3 times the amount that I should do. And that was an interesting day. I felt like I ended up making a YouTube video that I've not been able to share with anybody, because I was focusing so hard on whatever I was focusing on. And I couldn't stop. I was like a beast. But no, just one dose is fine, and alleviates my symptoms. So I feel like my fatigue is better controlled.
Yes.
My thinking is better, and my heart rate doesn't seem to jump up as high, because the fatigue is better controlled. Wow. So I'm taking it daily at the moment, and it seems to be helping me. But in a nutshell, I'm desperate to be better, and I will take anything. And so I am taking a whole cacophony of things. Is cacophony the right word?
I love it. Yeah. I mean, cornucopia, I like that word too.
Oh, that's a lovely word, Ryan.
Thank you. Darren, this has been such a lovely interview. Fingers crossed it actually recorded. So let's do a fake goodbye, and then I'll stop recording, and then we'll do a proper goodbye. Okay, so here's our fake goodbye. Thank you for joining, Darren. In all honesty, though, before I stop recording, I just, it's very kind of you to share such intimate details of what has been, I'm sure, a really scary process and continues to be. And I do hope that you know that I'm somebody in your corner, all the way on the other side of the world.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Hi, Renée.
Hi, how's it going?
It's really good. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know you're very busy. People think that I'm busy, and then they're going to hear about how busy you are, which is shockingly busy. This episode is called Keep Calm and COVID On, because my
Oh.
first interview is with Darren Brown, who's in the UK. So I thought I would borrow that, but also just talking about, the soldiering on in this COVID environment, which we'll learn about a little bit more because you work as a doctor. Do you want to tell us a little bit more what you do exactly and where you are?
Sure. So I live in Stratford, but I work in London, and
Stratford, Ontario, for anyone overseas.
true,
Stratford,
but
Ontario, Canada.
that's true, yeah.
But you work in
And
London, Ontario, Canada.
I do, the other London.
Yes.
And I work as pediatrician in an eating disorders clinic.
Okay.
So basically, I see anyone 18 and under with eating disorders. So that's what I do.
So, but you didn't always do that. In fact, we've known each other for a long time, like over a decade now, because we were both studying art history together, of all things.
I think it's 16 years.
That's a long time. But I mean, we still look really great.
I know. I shouldn't have said how long, eh? You can edit that.
So 16 years ago or so, you and I were studying, we were both in the same program doing art history, and you were also studying German, and you were you were doing a German theater class, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, you were, and then at one point you turned direction, you changed direction, you said, no, I want to go into medicine. What was your turning point?
Yeah, it's so I did French literature as well.
Oh yes,
and
that's right.
I was actually kind of like in the throes of I ended up doing graduate work in French literature. And I think around that time, my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I remember very much kind of struggling to understand the illness experience and just not really having a framework to understand what he was going through at all. And it was an interesting experience because I think he kept a lot of it to himself. And it was a very difficult experience to kind of be on the outside of that. And so it came from a very emotional space, actually, that was driven by curiosity and a desire to grow in a direction that I really hadn't really explored for many years, but I felt was very critical to, defining where I saw my role as, like in the future. And I remember kind of like when we were writing the personal statements, and I was like, Ryan, like, I don't know how I'm going to talk about this. And it was interesting to see that it came from a very powerful personal experience that I needed to understand what he went through, because I knew that would define what I would decide to do. It's hard to kind of understand more than that, because I think that it was just such it was an emotionally driven experience, because unlike many people, it wasn't like I had done life sciences and then tons of lab work and all of that. It was really like a profound experience that showed me a role that I wanted to further understand and bring a skill set to. And it's a very different skill set. I think it's a skill set in the arts, it's a skill set in communication, and it's a skill set in relating to people that are very different in terms of what they're going through compared to yourself.
Right.
And even after so many years, it's kind of an ongoing skill that I'm honing. And I find that I appreciate the time that I had to really explore freedom of thought and alternative viewpoints in my liberal arts education, because that has come back to serve me well in my practice of medicine.
And I thank you for sharing that very personal story. And I was pretty sure that was your turning point, but I wasn't. I think like that so much of what I hear people's conflict is and can be with the medical, establishment, is that there can be a lack of understanding. People can feel that they're misunderstood, that there's no bedside manner, and so knowing that you, as you say, you have this background in the liberal arts and you have a background of thinking and feeling and trying to put yourself in the shoes. Like I know in our art history training, it was about understanding the motivations behind the creation of art, the motivations behind, different expressions of beauty and expressions of emotion, and how different cultures express things and different cultures feel things, and even traveling, being a time traveler and having a sense of what it's like to imagine being in the Renaissance, and what was your day-to-day like, and how did this piece of art represent that. And so I mean, I'd like to think that my communication skills are also honed because I have this ability to sort of pop into chalk pavement pictures like in Mary Poppins. But I just think it's so impressive that, you decided to go into medicine. And then, of course, you were wildly successful because here you are practicing as a pediatrician.
Wouldn't say wildly successful. I think that in some ways, it's a very complicated process of defining your identity over a very long trajectory too. And what you know about yourself when you go in evolves over time as you come out of that process. And I actually find myself still, becoming in many ways. That profound curiosity that drives you initially, if it's in the right place, it continues to drive you in many ways. And I feel that that is absolutely genuine and it has maintained. And so, we're talking about this as if it was yesterday, but it, I guess it's already been 12 years.
Wow.
When I think about it. Yeah.
So what would a pre-pandemic, day in the life of Dr. Renée Pang look like?
So I'm 80% research and 20% clinical.
Okay.
So what it means is that I do a lot of my clinical work in the hospital, and so that's kind of 20% of my time, and then 80% is like I have actual research projects that I'm actively working on, which we will just kind of separate aside because I think COVID has really affected that in terms of patient recruitment and things like that for the time being. So on the days that I'm in clinic, what it looks like is typically I have kind of more complicated assessments that I have to do, and I try to space my kiddos within the time frame that I have to see, my follow-ups. And previously, like before COVID hit, it wasn't. I wasn't seeing such a volume of assessments that I wouldn't be able to complete within my 20% clinical that I had allotted. But starting in the summer and in the fall of this year, it's been, I think, a really hard time for a lot of the kiddos. And so we just saw a real increase in referral rates. I would say, if I were to guess, maybe a quarter to a third of an increase, just very, very significant. So it's challenging because sometimes you have, a very challenging situation like a pandemic, but the long-term kind of fallout can last for a long time. So even now, with us learning better of, strategies to limit infection and things like that, we are still seeing a lot of this heightened rate of referral. And that's even in the context that, kids have gone back to school and there's less isolation. It's actually, protective. We're just still seeing that onslaught of, what has happened with the pandemic earlier on.
Right.
See it really coming down in the most immediate future. And in fact, it's going to be something where we have to create access. It's not going away.
So I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people, informally, just about all the collateral damage of the pandemic, right? Of staying within your bubble and isolating, and that there's, there are more issues that are going to become apparent. I think that's what you're saying, right? There are more issues that are going to become apparent than just COVID-19, because we've had this dramatic behavior change, and we've had, society's sort of been upended, the society as we knew it. And so you're seeing a huge increase in need for support of people who have eating disorders.
And also kind of mental health services, right? And so it's kind of something that I see in my specialty in my practice, but also I think it's something that a lot of people are experiencing as well, as when I speak to my other colleagues.
Yes.
And I absolutely do see that this is not going away anytime soon, in the sense that there's going to be, we have to have some intermediate and longer term solutions that are going to have to be sustainable, because I do have some concerns about people burning out if we don't actually appropriately resource them, right? So that's been interesting. So like one thing is like, your referral rates. So you have kind of two things that you have to deal with when you have to, rise to that occasion. One is that you have to see them soon enough. And the other one is that you this is harder to do, but I am pleased to report that I have been able to help facilitate some of that. So the first thing I think you have to do is that you actually have to make the space and time to see people who are quite sick and try to connect them with treatment and services as soon as possible. But you can't really do that until you fully figure out what their kind of issues are, so that you know how to help them and navigate care. So I think that is something that my colleagues and I have really worked hard to kind of create rapid access clinics, ways for kiddos to see us who would otherwise have to wait 3 to 6 months. Sometimes it feels like an eternity when you're the parent, just like trying to hang on to your kid who's spiraling.
And these are kids that would be hospitalized, like their symptoms are so severe that they require immediate attention.
Yeah, and eventually, if they need to, then that's another way that they would access care in a more urgent way.
Okay, so you do see some kids that are not in hospital.
Ideally, if we can kind of get them connected earlier, then we would avoid a more serious presentation up front, and so you can get on top of the problem in a more timely way to avoid some of that, because even you can have collateral damage if you leave an issue kind of like unchecked for a long period of time.
Yes. Yeah.
Better outcomes. So that's kind of one thing. But eventually, we create all these rapid access clinics, and then we, in talking to some of the therapists, they're like, we appreciate that you're kind of seeing all these people, but like, we have to then follow up and, do all this long-term therapy. Like, we don't have time, right? So
you're like that one keener in class who's like, I'd like a bit more homework, please, Mrs. Krabappel.
But they have a good point, right? Like at some point, like you're limited in your time and your resource, and there's only so many hours a day.
Yeah.
Part of the other, hope that I've had in the last few months is to build capacity for kind of treatment and kind of in a more local setting. So, an example of that is kind of more locally, there was kind of talk of trying to hire somebody on board who could offer some therapy more locally to eating disorder patients. And so I have to say, I'm very naive. I have no idea how, healthcare administration works, but I'm really, really lucky to live in a community where you can just talk to like a CEO of the hospital, and they would have a conversation with you. So I think the person that I spoke to was actually a very, very, like, I guess the word is like extremely competent administrative assistant. Like she is an amazingly well-connected, intelligent, and thoughtful person. And I said, I am aware of this need. I think that this is what you need. Is there somebody that I can talk to kind of advocate on this point. And so she connected me with the director for mental health who in the local hospital. And then I said, I'm from this program. We have a lot of kiddos in your catchment. Like, how can I make any, suggestions on how to help you guys direct your resources better? Because we would love to kind of collaborate and cross train, but really, better serve this population and, avoid excessive travel and all that.
And how did they respond to that?
So they aligned a lot of their resources and hired a therapist, which I had, really recommended. And, we talked a lot about what kind of therapist they need, what kind of therapy they would deliver and stuff like that. And, I'm super happy because they just fired me an email the other day being like, we've hired someone, we're training them. Can you provide the other things that you said you would support? So honestly, I was for joy. Yes, jumping for joy. And I said, okay, I'll get it. So I, emailed a lot of the dietitian kind of experts we have within our team. I said, would you support this clinician? They're like, absolutely. And then, in kind of like getting a feel for just what the community has and, what we're offering to this population of patients, I learned that there are a lot of people who are kind of doing things like on their own to meet this need. So like next steps would be to really connect with them and to really kind of connect them with like our resource, our team, so that we can provide as much support and training moving forward. Because I think I really want to break down some of those silos in healthcare, right? Where, you get this, or you get it. And so it's creating a network.
We don't serve that postal code. We don't serve that age bracket. Yeah.
Like really creating resources, increasing training ability, cross training. So we will be cross training their therapists too, so that they can see some of the unique cases that we have and how we deal with it. And so it actually has been a super interesting process. And I'm not, at all an administrative expert, but it's an example where when you have the right people in the right places, you can have a conversation and really advocate for what your community needs and what your kiddos need and your patients and all. So, I didn't, didn't expect for it to happen, but it happened.
Wow.
So you have to ask.
It's pretty amazing to think that you were able to build that kind of a bridge during COVID because, I think it's remarkable that you did that, but I also think that one of the struggles, or one of the things that I seem to see a lot of, is there's like this very strong individualism that's coming out of the COVID experience, where people are, I'm putting myself first, self-care, and that means like I'm putting myself before my job, and I think a lot of that shift needed to happen anyway. I think a lot of us have been conditioned maybe to not look out for ourselves as much. But I think sometimes it has created some conflict around people not wanting to work together if it could put them at risk, or it could take more of their time. And so I just think that bridge that you built is even more remarkable given this climate. And just quick other round of applause for that.
I'm honestly, I'm just so happy.
Yeah,
I'm so happy because as I said, this is not going away. We are going to deal with the increased amount of load. And so the long-term solution is to develop local expertise and really empower them to really take this challenge on. Because sometimes, something like a mental health crisis following a pandemic like this, it might last for years before we get on top of it, right? So I think that if you kind of properly resource up front, then you will deal with your own staff in an in a more compassionate way, because otherwise you're pushing them towards fatigue too.
Right.
You have to.
Yeah. And so I guess, the sort of the last question, which is maybe the most important, is how are you doing in all of this? I mean, are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating enough food? You have a family, you have Christmas cards to write. Like how are you keeping afloat in all of this added pressure and with all these extra barriers?
So, because I have two eyes that are staring at me right now, I will tell you the truth. The truth is that we are at a surge time in terms of kind of what I do with my waking hours. And I would actually say it's a way of me managing a more significant workload. And others would say that I am kind of like having unrealistic expectations. So what does that mean? That means that I wake up at very early hours.
What hours? What were you gonna disclose? How early?
So at 5.
Okay.
Often, if it's like I have a deadline, I'll go earlier. And what needs to be kind of written as the caution warning sign on packages where children are shipped to your home,
yes,
and with no refund policy, is
yes,
that you have a extra sensorial perception as to where you're going to wake up. So if they know that you're going to wake up earlier, they're going to wake up super early too. So that has prompted me to wake up at very inappropriately early hours. And that's the only way that I ever get work done. Now, that being said, like I am just coming out from like a series of final exams for my graduate work, and I had some take-home exams, which were, nice, but I didn't really get to do them because I would try to, wake up at 5, and then I'd have my kiddos wake up at like 5:45, and I'm just like, why are you waking up? You never wake up at 5, whatever. And they're like, oh, like all the excuses in the world. And I'm just like, why? Like, it's Saturday morning. I'm doing the same thing. So then it's like, I can't be total hypocrite. But the answer is that I don't sleep very much. But I will be able to in a few days when I'm off for Christmas.
Okay. So you're getting a little bit of a holiday. Is this the kind of work that you can be off from?
You have to make that time, because even I, in my workaholic state, realize that if I don't take it off, I will become a horrible, horrible person. So I need to recognize that about myself.
And I'm glad that you have your lie detector sitting across from you, writing, like out of frame, writing Christmas cards, so that we know that you're telling the truth.
Like a polygraph.
Yeah, it's a little polygraph. Oh.
Whatever, but I'm like, you would hear, like, the lie detector would be just giggling at you, like, at the back, if I was to tell untruths.
Yes.
And so far, it's been quiet enough.
So far, it's been quiet enough. Well, I'm glad to hear that you are taking time and making time. I think a lot of us are anticipating, there's this sense of renewed hope because there's a vaccine. And I don't think a lot of us have really processed how long it's going to be before things, even with a vaccine, before things are the way that they used to be. And a lot of us, I certainly feel like a different person than I was a year ago, which is not a surprise because it's been a whole year almost. But maybe not all of us will want things to be the way they were before. And there's going to be I think there'll be some cultural shifts that happen, which are going to keep you very busy.
Yeah. And I think that as I learn more about what what my priorities are, because it really becomes a question of like realigning your priorities and just, is this actually something I want to do? Like, you have to actually always do that and have the diligence to be mindful that way. I think that is also going to have to happen because, as things, hopefully, maybe the word normalize is too powerful in the context of a pandemic, but, as we're able to kind of move away from a crisis type of climate, there might need to be a difference in priorities, and you might learn something about yourself, your relationships that you're either uphold or decide you want to do things differently. So I do think that there's going to be a little bit of that, and time will tell.
Yeah.
I will tell them.
Well, I'm so glad that so it's almost 10 p.m. and you have to get up at 5 tomorrow, according to that's not very long. And, there's still tooth time, and, you're going to be so wound up after this interview. You'll probably be just overjoyed. You'll be like jumping around.
Just jumping like a leprechaun. I've already, it's so funny. So, pandemic, like in true pandemic style.
Yes.
Right. I had very poor sense of time, date.
Yes.
And all that, to the point where, for your audience, I thought that, this is in all intents and purposes in my mind, the third time we have done this, because I'm just so kind of everywhere in my mind. But yes, but the thing is that I mentioned to some of my friends that I was doing this. They almost forgot the fact that, I had forgotten their birthday, or, didn't even, got their birthday wrong for 20 years. I was just like, what's wrong with me? Why, and I think that they are very forgiving that I am a little bit demented at this stage in my life, but they're like, you know what? It's COVID. We're happy.
We're all,
and you're going to talk about it. So this is my...
We're all doing, yeah, exactly. You can explain, this is your confessional. That's what this interview is. It's your confessional. All your friends, they're going to see it. They'll be like, oh, how could I ever have been mad that she ran over my cat? I can't, because of this.
Just my driving skills. They are just like that.
I'm kidding, everybody. That was a joke. That's not based in truth. It's not reality. I really do thank you, Renée, for taking the time. And also, I've said it in different ways, but the unique compassion and understanding that you bring to your work is so important. And if I were only under the age of 18 with an eating disorder and lived in London, Ontario, I would demand to be cared for by you. I just would.
It would have been a hypothetical, theoretical pleasure to have